Welcome to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure you subscribe to get notified of new stories and leave a rating. If you enjoyed today's story, forward it to a friend. And now, The Adventures of Tom Thumb. A long time ago, a woodcutter lived with his wife in a small cottage not far from a great forest. They had 7 children, all boys, and the youngest was the smallest little fella you've ever seen. He was called Tom Thumb. But though he was so small, he was far more clever than any of his brothers, and he heard a great deal more than anybody ever imagined. It happened that just at this time there was a great famine in the land, and the woodcutter and his wife became so poor that they could no longer give their boys enough to eat. One night, after the boys had gone to bed, the husband, sighing deeply, said, "We cannot feed our children any longer, and to see them starve before our eyes is more than I can bear. Tomorrow morning, therefore, we will take them into the forest and leave them in the thickest part of it, so that they will not be able to find their way back." His wife wept bitterly at the thought of leaving their children to perish in the forest, but she too thought it better than to see them die before her eyes. So she consented to her husband's plan. But all this time Tom Thumb had been awake, and he had been overhearing all the conversation. He lay awake a long while thinking what to do. Then, slipping quietly out of bed, he ran down to the river and filled his pocket with white small pebbles from the riverbank. In the morning the parents called the children, and after giving them a crust of bread, they all set out for the wood. Tom Thumb did not say a word to his brothers of what he had overheard, but lingering behind, he dropped the pebbles from his pocket one by one as they walked, so that he should be able to find his way home. When they reached the thickest part of the forest, the father and mother told the children to wait while they went a little further to cut wood. But as soon as they were out of sight, they turned and went home another way. When darkness fell, the children began to realize they were deserted, and they began to cry loudly. Tom Thumb, however, did not cry. "Do not weep, my brothers," he said encouragingly. "Only wait until the moon rises, and we shall be able to find our way home." When at length the moon rose, and shone upon the white pebbles which Tom had scattered, and following this path, the children soon reached their father's house. But at first they were afraid to go in, and waited outside the door to hear what their parents were talking about. Now it happened when the father and mother reached home, they found a rich gentleman had sent them 10 crowns, in payment for work which had been done long before. The wife went out at once, and bought bread and meat, and she and her husband sat down to make a hearty meal. But the mother could not forget her little ones, and at last she cried to her husband, "Where are our poor children? How they would have enjoyed this good feast!" The children, listening at the door, heard this and cried out, "Here we are, mother, here we are!" And overjoyed, the mother flew to let them in and kissed them all around. Their parents were delighted to have their little ones with them again, but soon the 10 crowns were spent, and they found themselves as badly off as before. Once more they agreed to leave the children in the forest, and once again Tom Thumb overheard them. This time he did not trouble himself very much. He thought it would be easy for him to do what he had done before. He got up very early the next morning to go get the pebbles, but, to his dismay, he found the house door securely locked. Then indeed he did not know what to do, and for a little while he was in great distress. However, at breakfast mother gave each of the children a slice of bread, and Tom Thumb thought he would manage to make the piece of bread do what the pebbles had done before, by breaking it up and dropping the crumbs as he went. This time the father and mother took the children still deeper and further into the wood, and then, slipping away, left them alone. Tom Thumb consoled his brothers as before, but when he came to look for the crumbs of bread, not one of them were left. The birds had eaten them all up, and the poor children were lost in the forest, with no means of finding their way home. Tom Thumb did not lose courage. He climbed to the top of a high tree and looked around to see if there was any way of getting help. In the distance he saw a light, and coming down from the tree he led his brothers towards the house from which it came. When they knocked at the door, it was opened by a pleasant-looking woman, and Tom Thumb told her they were poor children who had lost their road, and begged her to give them a night's shelter. "Alas, my poor children," said the woman, "you do not know where you have come to. This is the house of an ogre who eats up little boys and girls." "But, madam," replied Tom Thumb, "what shall we do? If we go back into the forest, we are certain to be torn to pieces by the wolves. We had better, I think, stay and be eaten by an ogre." The ogre's wife had pity on the little things, and she thought she'd be able to hide them from her husband for one night. She took them in and gave them food and let them warm themselves by the fire. Very soon there came a loud knocking at the door. It was the ogre coming home. His wife hid the children under the bed and then hurried to let her husband in. No sooner had the ogre entered than he began to sniff this way and that. "I smell flesh," he said, looking around the room. "It must be the calf which has just been killed," said his wife. "I smell child's flesh, I tell you," cried the ogre, and he suddenly made a dive under the bed and drew out the children one by one. "Oh, madam," he said, "so you thought to cheat me, did you? But really, this is very lucky. I have invited 3 ogres to dinner tomorrow. These brats will make a nice dish." He fetched a huge knife and began to sharpen it, while the boys fell on their knees and begged for mercy. But their prayers and pleas were useless. The ogre seized one of the children and was just about to kill him when his wife said, "What in the world makes you take the trouble of killing them tonight? Why don't you wait and leave it till the morning? There'll be plenty of time, and they will be much fresher." "That's very true," said the ogre, throwing down the knife. "Give them a good supper, so they may not get lean, and send them to bed." Now the ogre had 7 young daughters, who were all about the same age as Tom Thumb and his brothers. These young ogresses all slept in one large bed, and every one of them had a crown of gold on her head. There was another bed of the same size in the room, and in this the ogre's wife, having provided them all with a nightcap, put the 7 little boys. But Tom Thumb was afraid that the ogre might change his mind in the night and kill him and his brothers while they were asleep. So he crept softly out of bed, took off his brothers' nightcaps and his own, and went over to the bed where the young ogresses lay. He drew off their crowns very gently and put nightcaps on their heads instead. Then he put the crowns on his brothers' heads and his own and got back into bed. In the middle of the night the ogre woke up and began to be sorry that he had put off killing the boys until morning. "Never put off till tomorrow what you can do today," he said, and jumping out of bed got his knife and walked stealthily into the room where the boys were. He walked up to the bed, and they were all asleep except Tom Thumb, who, however, kept his eyes fast shut and did not show that he was awake. The ogre touched their heads one after another, and feeling the crowns of gold, he said to himself, "What a mistake I was going to make." He then went to the bed where his own daughters were sleeping, and feeling the nightcaps, he said, "Oh ho, here you are, my lads." And in a moment he had killed them all. He then went back to his own room to sleep till morning. As soon as Tom Thumb heard snoring, he roused his brothers and told them to dress quickly and follow him. He led them downstairs and out of the house, and then stealing on tiptoe through the garden, they jumped down from the wall and onto the road and ran swiftly away. In the morning, when the ogre found what dreadful thing he had done, he was terribly shocked. "Fetch me my 7-league boots," he cried to his wife. "I will go and catch those young vipers. They shall pay for this piece of work." And drawing on the magic boots, the ogre set out. He went striding over the country, stepping from mountain to mountain and crossing rivers as if they had been streams. The poor children watching him, coming in fear and trembling. They had found their way to their father's home and had very nearly reached it when they saw the ogre racing after them. Tom Thumb thought for a moment what has to be done. Then he saw a hollow place under a large rock. "Get in there," he said to his brothers. When they were all in, he crept in himself, but he kept his eyes fixed on the ogre to see what he would do. The ogre, seeing nothing of the children, sat down to rest himself on the very rock under which the poor boys were hiding. He was tired from his journey and soon fell fast asleep, and began to snore so loudly that the little fellows were terrified. Tom Thumb told his brothers to creep out and run home, which they did. Then he crept up to the ogre, pulled off the 7-league boots, and gently put them on his own feet. For being fairy boots, they would fit themselves to any foot, however small. When the ogre awoke, he missed his 7-league boots, and set off for home, very angry. On his way he had to cross a bog, and forgetting that he was no longer wearing his magic boots, he tried to cross it in one stride. But instead, he put his foot down in the middle and began to sink. As fast as he tried to pull out one foot, the other sank deeper, until at last he was swallowed up by the black slime. And that was the end of him. Soon after Tom Thumb had put on the ogre's 7-league boots, he took 10 steps toward the palace, which was 70 miles off, and asked to see the king. He offered to carry news to the king's army, which was then a long way off, and so useful was he with the magic boots, that in a short time he had made enough money to take care of himself, his father, his mother, and his 6 brothers for the rest of their lives. Thank you for listening to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure you subscribe to follow us for new stories and leave a rating. If you enjoyed today's story, forward it to a friend. If you have a suggestion for a new story, send us an email, magicmonorail@gmail.com. Until next time, good night. Would you like to make a podcast? Spotify has a way to let you make one easily, distribute it everywhere, and even earn money, all in one place, for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit right from your phone or computer, so you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. And video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free. You know, ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I've enjoyed sharing my favorite stories with children around the world. If you've ever thought of starting your own podcast, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started.